Hi, everyone. This is a new session where we continue to talk about developing an open source standard compliant library for converting or morphing a natural query into a SQL statement that can actually be useful for people who are not familiar with working with data, navigating data sets with SQL language or any other query languages. There's a couple of things here that I kind of wanted to kind of press on first. I know that Milan opened up a couple of pull requests. I don't know where these things are at, but it does help a lot. Going back and forth, like pair programming really is impactful because you get that feedback right away. When you're working with something, but even through PRs and getting comments from PRs and all that good stuff, it kind of still kind of is beneficial to just work with people in general and just see what they have to do to kind of get a certain task completed. So it looks like Gregory has some comments there, which is your PR doesn't show legit commit history other than his name only. So I'll wait to circle back with Gregory on this one because I'm not sure if this is ready yet or not. Um, Omar, do you want to talk to us through the validations, the tests that you put in place? By the way, there's a little bit of a standard upgrade there. Like last time I did tell you, if anything in a list is invalid, then you just kind of break the circuit. I was
Mm.
wrong. I think that we need to point out which elements in that list or which components in that list or which items are failing the validations. Because if you have a list of like 2,000, records, right? Imagine this, like you have a list of 2,000 records, right? You can't just keep pushing and failing each and every time you fix one of these 2,000 records. Just doesn't make sense. It's not a good engineering, so that's the point here. Salam Zia.
Uh,
Okay,
yeah,
so go ahead.
actually, I have a comment on that. I mentioned in the Discord channel, like currently the validate structure, that function that takes in the params.
Mm,
If like to make what you say work, I think that exception doesn't need to be instantiated inside the validate, local to it. Maybe we pass it to the validate and fill it in the list, right? So it's the same
mm.
exception, but in the loops, they use the same exception.
I see. So you want to basically, instantiate the exception outside. Let's visualize this a little bit. So we basically want to say, go ahead and create a var invalid AI processing exception equal new invalid AI processing exception like this, and then you're basically iterating. So for each, right, let's say we're validating table information, table info in table informations like that, and then you basically are going and saying, for each one of these, go ahead and um, add to that item. So you're basically you're adding each and every iteration. So maybe something like validate table information, and you're passing in maybe a reference invalid AI processing exception, and maybe the table information piece itself. So that's the table info, something like that. So you basically keep iterating, or maybe even something, more straightforward, because I don't like this playing with references this way. Maybe something even more into that regard, like you basically go and say invalid AI processing exception dot add data or something like that. And you basically go and say key, right? The key would be table something like an index, right? So maybe table information's index of, and then you take that table info in there. So basically the key is at that index particularly. And then the second one here is the value. So for each and every one of those, you're validating, but you still need to kind of put a condition in there, and that condition needs to say whether this piece is valid or invalid first before you add it. So you need something more like if is invalid, right? So you're basically passing data info in there, and you would basically go and say, if this table information is invalid, this record is invalid, then go ahead and create that. There's of course a smarter way to do this. I'll tell you about it in a second, but somehow you need that index. So if that is invalid, then go put the index in there and then run the validation information and then spit out why this is invalid. And you could add towards the same key. So you're validating for both, for every single element in there. Omar left a comment there, says, I was thinking the exception should be passed to, yeah, if you pass the exception itself to the validate, it starts to get kind of, you start thinking about references and stuff like that. We want it to stay at level 1, or level 0 rather. We want to stay at that level where it's very straightforward. There's no magic happening underneath. I don't have a strong rule against it. I'm just letting you know, like, things that would be a lot easier to kind of maintain and all that. But even like, let's just say, like, even if you take that route, like, let's just say you passed in the exception internally, right? Is invalid here is going to have to report one or many of the validation issues that it might find in a particular parameter. Don't just think about table information, think about the whole picture here. Like, imagine that the iteration, the list that you're going over has like about 20 of these or something like that. You still want to be able to go and say, I want to validate each and every one of these, right? Especially that you're digging into the content of these tables. So we are in this interesting situation where usually we would just validate the list is not null, and then whatever underneath that service, like a downstream service, would basically validate for each and every block of these, right? But that's not realistic, because here's a situation where you're going to have to validate for each and every item in that list, right? So, Kailu, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's better than what we had before. Definitely. Definitely. I mean, yeah, that's the way to go, right? I mean, we have all these functionalities
Yeah,
available in exception, right? So yeah.
yeah. I wonder if it makes more sense. Let me spin up Visual Studio here for a second. Um, I wonder if it makes more sense that if we give me a second. We'll try something together and see how that works. Yeah, so that's basically what we talked about last time. We basically said here's all the things that we want to do. But the problem here is that we said break if list table is null, right? So the table itself, is null. Okay, that's legitimate. And then break if natural query is null. We got that. And then we said break if any of list table information is null. That's not right. This here is wrong. This here is bad. The reason for that is because if you have 2,000 items, you need to know where are all the items are failing with some identifier of some kind, right? And if you don't have that identifier, then you need to find that identifier. Index is a global identifier that we can determine based out on here's all the issues that we're seeing, but still, we would also need probably to print out as much identifying information on that list, because the person that's trying to fix that problem, right, is not going to have that level of access. They're just using a library. So they need to understand which table exactly is having these issues. Go ahead, Omar. You want to say something?
Yeah, I said even for this one, still we can do it with the normal way without for loop. You just like in the rule that we create, like validate if table is not null. We just use some maybe link to find if any table is null. But you said for each table that's null, we want to log it with the name of the table, maybe,
or the index
but
of the item.
the index of the item.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the index, because that's the only thing that you know for sure is going to be there, right?
Mhm.
So ideally, like let's just imagine this. This is your list of tables, right? And some of them are completely out of hand, completely invalid. Some of them are not completely invalid. You know, they have some issues in them. Like this one, for instance, in here, it has, I don't know, I'm gonna just point it out that, you know, the name is null, but the columns are okay. So here's a list of uh, table columns, I'm assuming, something like that. And maybe, you know, inside of this, and I'm gonna get to that part, but just on the outside, here's a bunch of, you know, table informations that we want to point out which one of them are not in good shape, right? So this is a great standard upgrade because we basically get to think here about all these issues. So I'm gonna go and say students, right? And in here I have a column of some kind, table column, right? And this table column maybe has, I don't know, XYZ, name, right? And type is like varchar max or something. Never do varchar max in a database, by the way. That means it can take up to 2 gigabytes of data. It's a black hole that you're creating inside of your database system that has no end. Okay, so if that's the case, you have list of tables. This is bad, and this is okay, right? And we want to know that items and index, let me kind of shuffle them around a little bit, but we want to know that items and index 0 and index 2 are bad. They're broken. They have issues in them because of 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever these reasons may be. And even at this level of validation, we don't really validate that far. We could just go and do this, and that would be completely okay, right? Maybe we should even have the opposite of this. I just want to kind of just have this exercise with you guys just to see, like, let's say you have the name teachers, but columns is null, right? So this is bad because the name is null. This is bad because the entire item is null, right? This is okay, right? And this is bad because columns here are null as well, right? So imagine you're getting this list of tables incoming, and you need to validate for each and every one of them. So I know if I break this down into smaller pieces, I would do a validate in here. Watch this. And this validate, yeah, and I see why you're basically saying, oh, I want to pass in table information in there, sorry, the exception in there, so I can append to that. But you will end up doing ref like this, which is really ugly because you could lose your reference, right? Omar, that's also a possibility, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want to do that. We want to see if there is a way, like ideally, I want to iterate on each and every one of these and produce whatever we do to add, to do this add in here, to basically go and say, here's my rule. I want to iterate on the rules and update this invalid AI processing exception, right? Without having to pass the exception there to that. You know, one idea we could have is to just return like, what does this guy take in as input parameter? Just key values, right? We could iterate and keep returning key values and just add these key values as we go, like a tuple or something like that. Would that be feasible? Like if I go here and say, watch this. You could also even flatten that list. Like you could go and say, I want to flatten that list in here. So let's just try this together, right? Because this is us really trying to upgrade the standard. So private static, I'm returning a string, which is a key, and a string, which is a value, right? Validate whatever rules I want to run in there, right? So validate table information, right? And I'm passing in just one single table information. Right, so this is my table information. Let's just start really dirty and then see if we can kind of make it pretty. So I have this table information, and I want to basically go and say, here is potentially a list of this tuple that has a key value pair. Okay. And then I'm basically, I'm saying, let's see here, is invalid. So for every single property in that table information, I need to run. So I need something like a validate in here, an equivalent of validate that will basically go and say, here's a rule is invalid like that. Let me create one in here real quick. Is invalid, right? And this guy takes in a string, and this is value, right? And it returns that condition, which is the key value basically for this, right? We can even actually return like a list of dynamics, and these list of, yeah, why don't we just do that? We could just go here and say, here's your entire dynamic set. You will know to go and access that this way, right? So whatever we add in here, we basically have a dynamic and a string parameter. The exact same thing would happen in here. So here's a dynamic and a string for the parameter like that, right? And that list that we bring out of this, which is the validation result, that would be what comes out to that exception that we want to add to after the iteration. Gregory says, if a table name is null, why move forward with that table, whether there may be a column? We won't. We're gonna exit early. But I'm talking about whether, like, when the column is, the name is null, the column is not, because the table information itself, Gregory, could have multiple issues. So if I break every time I find just one issue, that's going to be an endless interaction between the person that's trying to fix the issue and the person that's reporting that issue. It's like when we go and say you have a student and you have an ID and name and date of birth, and name is required. So if name is null, I still want to tell them also the ID is not valid, also the date of birth is not valid, which is what we call a non-circuit breaking validation, basically. But if the entire object itself is null, we need to somehow be able to also report that, to go and say, here's a key value pair, and the item at this point is null or invalid. Like, we can't break in there, which is a very interesting case.
What's the flattening idea you mentioned before? You want to flatten them in like one table with all the columns, or?
Yeah, so all the validation issues like this will only validate one item in a list. Just one item in a list, right? So all of these will produce a list of dynamic string, but we want to flatten door. You know what I mean by you know what select many is? Have you played with select many before? It's like imagine that you have let's say you have a list of a list like this, which is what's going to happen basically, and this guy has a string. It's a list of lists, right? List of lists, right? And here's my oh, come on, like that. And I'm basically saying, here's a list of of key value pairs. And I'm going here and I'm saying Hassan, Washington, Kailu, right? Washington, like that. And then I can go in another list like this. And I can basically say Omar, Canada, like that. So you have list of lists, right? So each one of these will be the validation outcome of each and every one of this table informations. They're going to come to you as a list of lists. Now check this out. If I go and do this list of lists dot select mini, right? And I'm basically saying, just give me the items. Look what happens. It prints them all out as one list. It flattens them. And now you can take that list and add it in your invalid AI processing exception. You're picking up what I'm putting down there, brother? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I am, but I'm kind of thinking how this is. Do you think this is generic enough to handle any list of complex objects coming in?
Yeah, I mean, these are the outcome of validations, right? It's not the, what I mean by that is that the outcome of validation, it would be like, it would be something like a, we need to basically say at item of index X, this validation issue has happened, right? So we can basically say item 0, right? And then we can go see here, item is null. And then we can go here and say item 1 at index 1, name is required, or something like that. We can also do something like this. We can go say here name, and then basically say value is required. So you're basically literally giving them a list that says at these particular items with this particular structure, these values are failing.
Yeah, I understand.
Now, just so you understand, like, Kylo, did we have to fix for this problem before? I could swear we did run. I know that we had a list that we need to process, but we just gave every single item in the list to a downstream service. And if the item is invalid, the downstream service would just put a circuit break, right? I think that's what we did in the past, but that's not viable. That's not valid in here. But then again, it brings in the question of this is gonna change the whole mindset here. This brings in another problem, which is what can the end user really do if they run into a situation where the library is telling them one of your tables are invalid? What are they supposed to do? Like go delete the table or something? Because that's the input.
Because we are also responsible for that as well, because we are getting the data for them, right?
We're getting the data for them, right? So imagine this particular product, this library is definitely going to be used by a developer. So it's okay. These exceptions, they need to handle it and deal with it. But whatever is built on top of this is someone who has no access or knowledge of querying data. So we can't go and assume that they will know what to do with it.
I think, like Hassan, that problem in the other broker and service, when we get the data back, if we discover that there is something is null, we should post validate the result and tell them change your natural language query, or fix it, or try another one, right?
What if one of them is like that first, this query, this validation query, that's hard coded. That's what Milan was writing the other day. That's not coming from from AI. That's us basically going and saying, give me all the tables and give me all the properties and give me the data types on all of these properties or columns for each one of these tables.
Oh yeah, correct. Just yeah.
So it doesn't matter what their query is.
Yeah.
Right? So it brings me back again to this piece. Somehow we need to say that, oh, the name, something like we should say something like name at 1, right? Or just say at 0. We need to find a way to say maybe something like this: item 0, item 1 dot name, or something like that. So you're basically saying item 0 is completely invalid. It's the whole thing is null. We can't validate it. Or you start iterating. But then again, there's another problem, which is like when we write our validation rule, there's this assumption that the container is not null. Otherwise, we break the circuit. But in here, we can't do that. We can't just go break the circuit on this one because it's multiple items. These items in that list are exactly the same role and the same position as the properties in the object. So we can't break a circuit there. Unless the list itself is null, then we break the circuit. Right? So I'm okay with this kind of pattern of basically reporting back and saying item at this particular index, the name is invalid or something like that. Although there is no guarantee whatsoever that people will actually understand, especially the developer will be like, you're telling me index 1. Which one? They could be reordering the list or something like that. Thank God we're not using Go programming language. The crazy dude that built it, every time you call the list, they shuffle the list because he says as an engineer, you shouldn't expect your list to come back in the exact same order that you put them in. We don't have that problem in .NET. Thank God for that, right? So that would ruin this whole approach here that we have. But so again, just going back to this, how do we even go and say validate that the object itself is null and then validate internally if the properties within that object are also null? We could end up with a nasty situation where it basically goes and do something like this, which I really don't want to have, but here we are. So look at this. We could end up assuming we can we can do like a safe navigation or they call it the Elvis annotation. We could end up with a situation where things looking like this. Columns, item is null or value is required or something like that. Because it's validating anyway sequentially for each and every property on the items in that list. And these should be zeros, sorry. So 0, 0. Yeah, so it's basically saying this item is null, and I went and tried to validate these, and they're also null. But that's just going to be really chatty. Like, imagine you have 200 items, and 20 of them are null. You're going to multiply that by the number of the properties. So that's also not a good solution. Right? So some logic internally needs to happen to say, if it's null, then return. If it's not null, then continue to validate the rest of the properties. Which is it's not something that we've ever done before. We usually just break the circuit.
Yeah, going back to the same single exception, and maybe with another method, but calling the validate multiple times, as I saw in the standard, like the first time in the loop for the name, for the table, and if it passes, we call it for the table.columns. So like calling it multiple times on the same level in the loop. But again, we need some way of handling kind of the same exception, getting one exception, not many, right?
Right. You could break the circuit if it makes sense, but I mean, let's just go back all the way here. If the table information is null, is this a worthy incident to break the circuit? I think that's the real question. Like, if I have a list of table informations and one of these items is null, is there any meaning in continuing at all? Is there any purpose in continuing? I mean, we do continue if a required field is null, right? We don't continue, we just continue validating. So this should inspire a new idea. Like, we need a new solution, and that's the beauty about these projects. Like, we think it's straightforward, but then you run into something and you learn from it. So just going back to this, at this table level here, like at this one method level here, we can basically go and say return, check this out, return table information, switch. If table information is null, right? Then there is no point of continuing. Then we basically go and say, give me this item number. I guess we still need the index, right? So I need something in here that basically says int index, right? And it needs to say something to the effect of item index item is null, right? So you're basically going and saying, here's your list, or here's whatever. Like I have nothing else at this point in terms of validation other than just a new list. And this is what's coming back of, do this dynamic string like that. And I'm basically saying, here's your tuple. And I got nothing more other than just telling you that this is, oh, this needs to be this way. Like that. So this is me basically pattern matching and then saying, if this is null, then there's no point of continuing at all. But if it's not null, which is every other case, then we need something in here that basically goes and says, go over each and every, since this is not null, go over each and every one of these and report back the issues that you see at the first level. It has to be the first level. Like if something in the columns themselves is problematic, that's not a concern at the moment, right? We're not really generating a full report in depth and width. We're just staying on the width level. So I guess if we do it this way, we would need something in here that basically goes and says, validate table information properties or something like that, right? And you're moving further into the rest of these, really. So you're basically still taking the table information and you're taking the index like that. Let's just see, let's entertain this for a second, and then we'll make it pretty, I promise. So let's do that. And then inside of these, we're basically now going and saying, okay, now that this is the case, let's go ahead and validate each and every one of these, each and every property in here that we care about. So it's also gonna have to, we also gonna need to think about how do we ensure that we're only reporting the ones that are actually invalid. Like only the properties that are invalid are the properties that we care about, right? So does it make sense to define each and every one of these properties, like literally go and say is invalid, I don't know, is invalid table or invalid query? What do you pass in here? A list? No, not this one. That's not what I want. Just thinking out loud here in terms of the possibilities, right? What's in here that we can really just say, um, let's see here. Let's just start simple. Is a name invalid, right? And you're basically going and saying table information, not name, and you're basically saying string is null, empty, or white space. By the way, null or white space, for those who don't know, null or white space takes care of empty as well. So you'll see is null or empty and is null or white space. Is null or white space covers in null, empty, and white space, basically, for some reason. I don't know why. So if that's the case here, then we need to report back and say, okay, this is invalid. And if it's not, then we just do nothing with it. Right. So if this is a value, then I need to kind of go and say, is this null or empty or white space? And also is column invalid? And that's where we basically say table information dot columns is null.
Like is columns, right? Because we care about the columns list out of it, right?
Just the list,
Yeah.
not right. This is just kind of brain dump. That's just basically going and saying, this is what I'm trying to do. Ideally, I need a list that comes out of this, and this list will have the item index, right? And then the issue with that item. I don't even think we need the conditional here. We may, I don't know, we'll find out, right? So if I build something in here that says private static is invalid, private dynamic is invalid, okay? And I'm basically going and saying string value, something like that. And then I'm basically going and saying condition. So string is null or white space with the value. And then the message here basically say value is required, like that, right? Then now I can do a list. Literally, I can just, here's how I can do this. I can return and say new list of dynamics, right? And I can go here and say is invalid because I know that this guy is going to return the stuff that I want. This is private static dynamic, right? Because it's not reading anything from the class, right? And I'm basically, this is literally the flow. I'm basically going and saying for each one of these, go ahead and define this way. So I know this is going to return something like this. So this is what's going to return dynamic. And then you go and say name of table information dot name, right? But that's not enough because you need to define which item you're at exactly, right? So that's not enough. You have to go like this. Just see here. And I have to go and say this is item of that particular index, like that. Okay, so that closes the loop, and then I can now go here and say table information dot name, right? So this would be your what did we call it? Rule parameter, right? So it would be like that, rule parameter, like that. Sure. Okay, why is it tripping like that? The tuple element name rule is ignored because different name or name is specified by the target type. No, it's not. Oh, yes, it is. Okay, let's do that. Let's do it here. Does it matter then if I put it in here? It doesn't. Great. So yeah, something like this, right? And then you would basically go to the next one and basically say rule is object invalid. That's different because you're basically going and saying I'm validating something else. That's an object. Here's an object in here. Does anyone here appreciates the or cares about the escape to use reserved things? I don't know. Some people really hate that part. Here, and they're basically saying value is null, right? And in here, we can basically say is object is invalid because a list or anything else in the world is really that. I can go and say table information dot columns, and then parameters or parameter, and do the exact same thing in here. So here's your columns, like that. Is object invalid? Actually, I don't need to do that. I could just do is invalid, but how is it gonna determine? Let's see what the compiler does here. The compiler here identified this as the string one. Oh, I love C#. This is so smart. I love it. You see what it did there? It knew based on the type, like it couldn't map it to the nearest identifiable type. So it said, oh, I guess you're with the object. And oh, this is wild. I love this part. This is pretty good. This is really good. So yeah, something like this. So now you're returning that list, right? You could do where, right? And then rules, well, not rules, well, validation validation rule condition is true, like that. And you can turn this into IEnumerable so it doesn't bark at you. You see what I did there? I basically went and said validate all of them and then just give me the ones that are bad, that are broken.
That's actually, thinking about it, it's genius, because now you will have a loop. You are collecting the rules in a list. At the end of the day, you'll pass them to the validate at once. Right? So now this will be called in a loop.
Yep.
For all tables, and the result will be passed to that validate. Okay.
Yep. I also think personally, like the inheritors of any standards in the tech industry are the simplest minded people, because you get too smart. Nobody knows what you're talking about anymore. Really, nobody knows who you like. What are you talking about? But in this case here, it's different. So this is the properties. So check this out. Like now this guy is returning a list of properties. So you see validate table information. If it's the whole table is broken, sure, go ahead and die, no problem, right? Not you, the table, right? But if the table is solid, right, why don't we just go ahead? But this one is still broken. This one is not right, because this one needs to say, I'll tell you. Yeah, this one is missing a piece. You see the missing piece because it needs to basically say, I'll tell you. Is it gonna let me do this? Ha, that's wild. Okay, so basically we need to go here and say rule is object invalid, is invalid, right? And then in here, I'm basically saying the name of whatever that may be. And I don't have to write these rules anymore. So I can just go here and say table information, like the table information itself. So now it knows that it needs to go back to the object, and then parameter in here. And the parameter in here will be, I don't even need this part anymore. I just need to say, let's see here, what did we do? We basically said go colon invalid and then say, yeah, exactly. So really the item itself. What did we say? Yeah, just really, that's just the item itself. We're basically saying the item itself in table information is broken. And we might need to identify the type at some point. I don't know, we'll find out, but here we are. So this is a rule and this is a parameter. Just a proof of concept. We'll make it a little bit cleaner. Like somehow I don't want to pass an index. I want it to just know what to do, right? But we'll get to that part. Right. So now this is at the table information level. Now, dare I say, I can do the same thing and just iterate over each and every one of the table informations are passed in down to me. So basically I can go here and say private static, I don't know, let's do, validate table informations, right? And now you have a list of table information like that. Let's just return default for now. Oh, it's void, so it doesn't care. Cool. Does it care if I do this? Yeah, that's weird. I don't know why people do that. That's some old school C++ stuff that people don't do that anymore. Anyway, so now I can iterate over the list and bring back the list that matters to me. So I can, like, if I iterate over each and every one of these, what do I get at the end? Like, let's assume none of these is just an empty array. So if I flatten it, it doesn't matter. Oh, that's fantastic. So I could just go and do this then. Table informations dot select table information, validate table information in here, and pass in table information. So now this guy is going to produce a list, an IEnumerable of dynamic string. Basically, that's what this guy is going to give me back. What if I do select many? Can I do that? Aha. So now what does this guy return? Var x equals. What do you return, my friend? And what other value? Oh, you can get the index in here. You know this, Omar, right? I can
Yeah,
do that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I don't know if it's the first or the second parameter, honestly.
It's the second, I think.
Second. Nice. See, now we're just breaking out every single thing we know about C#, anything that we know about. So see, this is going to give me a flattened out list of um, uh, like validation rules. And if the list is empty, then it's empty. It's just going to flatten it. I need to actually validate that one. So if I go here and say new list of string, but there's nothing there, would I still get select many? What do I get here? Hold on. This is list of lists. Select many. Should just kind of flatten it out. Look at this. Item 0, all of that good stuff. And then, yeah, there you go. So if the list is empty, it doesn't care. It's just gonna ignore that. Fantastic. Fantastic. So let's just see here. So if I'm doing that, validate table informations, and I am mapping these this way, then I may as well just return them. Like I can now go here and say var invalid AI processing exception. AI processing. What is that? Where is this coming from? Should this be called invalid AI processing exception, or is this specific?
I have one, Hassan, but you didn't get latest.
But I don't have latest. Yeah, I get it. I got it. Let me just put this now for demo purposes. Invalid AI processing exception. And then I'm gonna go here and steal all of that good stuff that you did here. I'm gonna just throw it in here. And I probably don't need that one. Right, so if I go back, can I now just go and say invalid AI, why did I say add? AI processing exception dot upsert data list. Aha, watch this. Watch this. Upsert data list. Right, and if I'm upserting a data list, then I need to morph whatever this is into that data list that the exception understands. So this guy's expecting like well, it does expect, oh, does it not allow, let's see, add range, add data? Oh, it takes a dictionary or something like that. What else does it take other than a dictionary? It takes a key and parameters. Right? So something needs to kind of group these.
Hassan, just this, you're collecting all the rules in one list. Why do we need to do this now? Like we just pass them to the validate and it loops through them.
What? So, go ahead.
If you go to the validate function method there, it just takes a list of rules, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we could do that. Why did I not think about that? So, yeah, I guess, yeah, you're right. So I could just go and say, no, you're absolutely right. I could just go like this and say, hey, here's all your rules. All I have to do, that's a great point. Thank you. So I guess we could just go here and say, this guy is returning dynamic string. It's an enumerable of dynamic string. We have to turn it into an array. There you go. That works. right? And then we just let it operate, right? Does this work? I don't know. Let's find out. We have about 8 minutes in this session. But Omar, you know, you're gonna have to go and take all that work and just basically
Sure.
kind of okay.
I,
So
maybe let's take a look at the tests, make sure they're in a good state. I'm sure
yeah,
like you will have your comments on them, but
yeah.
yeah.
So let's just see if our theory is actually true, right? There was a point in time where Visual Studio would allow you to read the context. Like I could call a method that I'm defining here in here. Do we still have that leverage? Oh, that breaks my heart. There was a point I could swear where you could just write in here as an addition to this, except that you're executing the code. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe from a different timeline or something like that. But I could swear that was a thing at some point in time. Anyway, just don't take my word like this is my best off the top on a live stream. That means we need to think and make this clean, right? I don't have a problem with these two. I think this is all right. I'm having a little bit of heartburn doing that part in here, but it's the best I can think of. Maybe we could do something better here. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, and in here, we definitely need to do something about it. But so let's just test this thing, right? Let's see if it's actually functional, right? What I want to do is that I'm going to create private static void delete me like that. And I'm going to go steal that list that I created, invalid lists, table informations, new list table informations. I know some people are irritated. I'm saying table informations, but it's not really the English word. So here's a table information. So one of them is basically null. So that's our very first test. And then here's another one that basically has a perfect perfect columns, seemingly perfect columns, but it doesn't have new table column. I guess a list of, right? List of table column. Right? And then another one that will be kind of bad in terms of it doesn't have, well, this one has neither one of them. So it's an object. It's not null, but it doesn't have anything in there. And then this one is like that. And then the last one is basically where the name is actually present, but just a bunch of permutations, just different tests that we want to test in here. So I just say here, this is students, that, right? And this one is actually the one that's null. So what's our hypothesis here? What's our expectations? Item 0 will be required, can't be null. Item 1 will have 2 issues. Item 2 will have the name, and item 3 will have the columns. So 1 issues, 2 issues, that's 3, 4, 5. We should get about 5 issues in here. Okay, cool. Let's go and run validate table informations. And here's invalid table informations. And then I'm going to pretend like I'm calling this on the happy path just to trigger the call. Just to trigger the call. So I'm just going to go here and say delete me. It's definitely going to stop in here as soon as I run the test for it. Right? So where is the test for this? This would be in here. Yeah, any one of these tests will do. So control RT will basically produce that thing. And then we should get an exception. So here's a failure. Right? Am I getting the right failure information here? I know it's very small. So this guy here is saying what? It's saying invalid AI processing query error occurred, fix the errors and try again. Right, I need to see where that exception's at and catch it Do we have the try catch in place already? We don't. Cool. So I need to just put a breakpoint in here. Let's try this again. Here's right click, debug. So our hypothesis was that we need to find about 5 of these issues, right? About 5. So do we actually have 5? Let's find out. Oh, you can't see that window, can you? So add watch there. And this is really small, so let me fix my res in here real quick. 175, bigger than life. There you go. And then here's my watch. Can you see this, Omar? Is this visible to you?
Yes.
This part?
Yes.
Great. So here's the data. That's a good sign. We have 5. Look at that. And now when people are getting validation saying item 0 has 1 issue, and the issue here is that the value is required. Item 1 has 1 issue, which is that the item name. Right, so this is item name, value is required. Okay, and then item 1 columns. This is not doing what I wanted it to, though. You see the problem, right? I mean, it's giving us the answers that we're looking for, but it's not the answers that we're looking for. I don't know how to explain this. Do you see the problem here? There's a little problem here. Do you see it?
If I remember the structure you had correctly, yeah, the second one missing name and columns.
Yeah, so you see how it repeated itself. It basically identified every key as its own thing, which really sucks because I wanted it to basically go and say, no, this is actually invalid. But this is not like an unsolvable problem. I think the only issue that we had here is that we basically considered the parameter itself as its own thing instead of basically going to this invalid and saying, and sometimes we did this in the past, we basically go and say string a property name or something like that, right? So in here, we would basically end up saying, oh, for this invalid, it's actually name of table information dot name, right? And you don't have to worry about that part anymore, which is a little cleaner to me, to be honest with you. Like that makes me feel a little bit better, right? And then we repeat the same thing, but this property name, it's going to have to go in here and basically property name in here. It needs to go in here and be like the value is required or is invalid, or something like that, right? We can do the exact same thing in here. We're basically going to go and say object, and then string property name, and then so on and so forth. So what's going to happen here is that when you're generating these keys, they will all be like nested under item 1 and item 0, item 3, and all that. Let me do this. Let me create a new branch here. Users Hassan Habib POC standard validate list, right? And let me just go in here and say POC validating a list of items. And let me push that. Omar, you get the idea, right? It's not building, but you know what I'm trying to do, right? So if you keep passing these in here, that would be our way forward. And I am totally okay with this style of validation. We did that before. So we would need something in here like this, property name in here. Property name, like that. You know what I mean? Picking up what I'm putting down there? So that's basically that part. What do you think? Do you think you can take that one? We can go over the test that you had tomorrow if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. So do you want me to make the test pass using this, or we'll do it on live? Exactly. I'm not understanding.
We can do it live either. I don't care either way. I mean, we have to upgrade the standard anyway. right? Because this is an interesting case, right? So if I do, let me just kind of clean this up for you. So this all should build, right? So if I go back into my test and say right-click debug, let me just show you the result of this. So check this out. If I go and do add watch, I don't know why I added watch twice. Now look, this is going to be much cleaner because look, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, but there's 5 issues, right? So if you look here, it will say item 1 has these issues, which is name is required, name value is required, whatever it needs to happen in there. You know what I mean? I don't know why it says name. Oh, because I copied without thinking. That's why. So in here, this should be columns. Like that. Right? So if I go back here and kind of debug this again, I should be able to see the watch on the watch in here. There you go. Open that. Data. Item 1. Item 1 has issues. What are they? Name is required and columns value are required. Versus the ones where it says, you know, for item 3, you have an issue that the columns value is required. Versus item 1, where the value says the value itself is required, like the actual object is missing. That's it.
Oh, that's clear. But now still we need to do the same for columns, right? In a separate.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's worthy of a circuit breaking, and then you do the same thing for columns. But anyway, you get the idea. You know, change validation references. Okay, so that should be a good start. This is a huge piece, another just upgrade to the standard, right? Because we're basically saying, hey, we never talked about validating lists. What would that look like? And here we are kind of talking about this topic outside of this project. Let's connect tomorrow and see how far we can take this. I think there's a potential there for us to do great things there. Thank you all so very much. Appreciate you all. And, you know, let's see how far we can take this tomorrow. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.